protections that could be used to push protections from one jurisdiction across the world, to try and get the best legislation from different parts of the world and give it to every part of the world. So that sort of dedication to protecting sources is something that our sources have seen. And I suppose from an institutional viewpoint, we lionize the source and sources know it. We do not claim to represent the mainstream. We do not claim even to have readers as our number one loyalty. Rather, we claim to have sources as our number one loyalty. And that has resulted in this huge collection of source information. This thing wasn't working at all, was it? This huge collection of source... That has resulted in this huge collection of source information.
You're good, don't worry.
I'm good?
She's a sound person.
Okay.
We'll let you know.
This huge collection of source information, of which you have seen some that has come forward to the public. As an example, this video that was very famous in the past 2 weeks is one of that. But we have a lot more like that. And as a small organization with only 5 full-time people, 800 volunteers and 10,000 people on our extended network, we've been able to do a hell of a lot. We have changed 2 governments, taken the scalp of a prime minister, taken the scalp of a defense minister, and many other reforms. You may be familiar with the Swiss bank case we had in San Francisco in February 2008, where Bank Julius Baer, the largest private Swiss bank, tried to sue us and take down our domain through the support of 11 major press organizations and ACLU, EFF, RalphNaderCitizen.org, and SPJ and Lucy Danglish. We managed to pull together a coalition in 10 days, which turned that over, cost that bank over $300 million in lost profits from its IPO, and 6 months later the CEO committed suicide. The lawyers who attacked us, I don't know anyone here who was at this panel yesterday, this moving panel with John and Diana Priest on it. Those bastards that went after John were the bastards that went after us, and we crushed them like a bug. Lovely and Singer. So we have developed an organization that from the ground up is multinational, from the ground up spreads assets over the world like multinationals do to avoid tax, like multinationals do to avoid asset seizure. We have done this because we believe seriously in what we do. So we built our organization from the ground up to make it unsuable in practice.
And with that, we'll come back in a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. I like somebody who's unsuable. I want to be that way when I grow up. Gavin MacFadyen.
First, a thanks to Lowell and to the Logans for doing this. It's been not only genuinely informative, but also inspiring. And I'm a great fan of what we just heard about. It has enormous consequences for us in Britain. And has led partly in this new changed environment to the formation of something called the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which I've been involved in London, which came out of an organization we set up 7 years ago called the Center for Investigative Journalism, which was a training organization, which began to do its own investigations as training operations, of course, not as proper journalistic things, because the British Charities Law precludes the possibility of actually investigating anything for real purposes, but it's okay if it's training. So, we did that, and we've taken on right now the Metropolitan Police, and we're also taking on a very large American multinational. More about that at the end of the year. I should say, however, that uniquely for us in Britain, we had an idea to do this, to form a fund which would support journalists doing difficult work that their employers wouldn't back. And we got very little money. We got 50 or 60,000, which wasn't really much to go on. And then one day, one of our board members, in fact, who's now our chair, wrote us a check for £2 million. And that set up the Bureau. And we now have a team of 9 people, 7 are full-time, a bunch of interns, and we have 12 freelancers working on specific projects on EU corruption, local council corruption, pharmaceutical fraud, and various military questions about which I'm not at liberty to speak. But what determined what we did and how we did it were the unique and strange libel constraints, which Julian knows a great deal about, and others do too, in Britain. It meant that the entire structure of everything we did was entirely determined by libel law. In other words, to protect our pockets, our deep pockets, as it were, we don't have that many, but we do have some, we needed to find a structure that would protect them from really invidious and disgraceful attempts to seize our assets, which is quite common in Britain. So we've devised a whole set of complicated structures, and now CIJ, our organization, the Center for Investigative Journalism, has nothing whatsoever to do with the organization we set up called the Bureau. We're entirely separate lawyers, everything else. And a series of committees which further isolate by 6 stages the money from the journalism. I mean, it's quite mad, and we spent £65,000 with the lawyers trying to figure out how to do this, but we have. And the law, of course, enables this pursuit of the deep pockets as the most effective threat against the kind of journalism we all want to do. Because if you can stop the money, you can stop the journalism. And that's what these people have decided to do. It took us 1.5 to 2 years even to secure charitable status, because the Blair government was very hostile to the idea that there could be an independently funded notion of this kind of journalism. In that respect, they were the same as the Bush government. Very, very similar. Well, the only thing that was odd about it is they called themselves Labor. But as a result, we have these 2 organizations, and the Bureau, because of these same curious constraints, can't publish. We can't have an institution, we can't even found an institution in Britain that will publish. So we can produce. And that means that we use regular media outlets to do the publication because they can accept the liability, which we can't. We would need an instrument worth £45 million to protect ourselves against that kind of litigation. And the reason for that is that though libel damages are capped at about £300,000, roughly $500,000, which we could get through that. We couldn't get through the $1.9 million it would cost in legal costs if we lost a case. And that would be the smallest sum. It now works out to £1,400 an hour. That's what the lawyers get to beat us up. And the judges are notorious in Britain for siding with this thing. As you'll know, the scandalum magnatum is the law predecessor in Britain, a 14th century law which allowed the state to kill you if you spoke ill of your superiors, which of course is the nature of libel. And insurance, I should just say parenthetically, for those of you who want to know any more boring detail about the awful British climate, you can insure because the insurer insists on the legal strategy in court. What that means, of course, is they can agree to a libel at any time to save costs. So we're not having that, so we're uninsured. And I'm proud to be uninsured. The Bureau has this full-time staff. We have now 17 people on the payroll. Offices at City University where we're protected to some degree by the university. We have large access to graduate students, but more importantly, 27-inch Macs. We have a lot of them in the office, which is the nicest thing I think I've ever seen. And CIJ, of course, has supplied a lot of people to the Bureau, and we're very pleased to have done that. The best news, though, is that one of our best interns probably, was a brilliant young reporter who was immediately recruited out of our midst by the Financial Times. She wrote a small piece on Blair's private funding and private finances, and then she announced that she was quitting the Financial Times to join the Bureau, at which point the editor of the Financial Times, a rather august figure with a very correct accent, decided that he went to her and said, that's really a disgraceful idea. I'll make you, he said, the chief investigative reporter of the Financial Times. And for a young woman in her early 20s, that was an astonishing notion and a very good one. She then said, I'm still leaving. And so he then said, a wonderful woman, and he then said to her, well, then we'll join the Bureau. So we now have in our offices, we now have a small group of rather bemused FT reporters who are not known for their sense of humor, working with us in a very collegial way. And I must say, Lowell's operation here was an inspiration to it. And we use that as a way of justifying what they were doing to themselves. So they now quote Lowell's thing as something they want to do. There's been I should just say conclude, I don't want to talk about it. One note that there's been an explosion of interest in investigative reporting in London. And it's really going on in the last 4 or 5 years. And we like to think that we had something to do with that, but I don't really believe that's true. I think even though we were very active in Freedom of Information Act and doing all kinds of stuff and educating a lot of people through summer schools and things, the real reason, of course, was the one thing that we haven't discussed here in this conference, but which is on everybody's mind in Britain, and which is the war. And the war did more to bring about a change in the culture of investigative reporting in Britain than any other single factor. And we're involved in that, and I want to continue being involved in that. I hope all of you will be as well.
Thank you, Gavin. John Weber, the Bay Citizen, a new, I think, landmark in the fact that there's a renaissance in investigative reporting, I think I can call it that, in the San Francisco Bay Area. And the latest edition with the biggest bankroll.
Thanks, Lowell. I'm not sure we actually do have the biggest bankroll. Have you done the math on that? But, let me just grab this up. So my name is Jonathan, and as some of you may know, I'm a relatively recent convert to the cause of nonprofit journalism. But I'm happy to. There's a much more coherent explanation for that than you all might think. So I'm more than happy to chat about that. I started at the very end of January with the Bay Citizen. The organization really just started at that time. I've been extremely busy over the last few months, mainly with building the team. We're hiring a team of 15 journalists at the outset, which will be about half reporters and half editors, producers, and others. As you might imagine, it's quite a time to be hiring journalists, and so that has been a lot of fun, actually, as a process, and also very time-consuming in the sense that there's lots and lots of people to talk to. We did hire, as our managing editor for news, a guy named Steve Faineru, who some of you may know, who's one of the preeminent investigative reporters in the country, won the Pulitzer in 2008 for his coverage of the war, and specifically the Blackwater company and private security contractors in Iraq. So Steve is actually going to be running our beat reporting team, which will be about half a dozen people focused on what we refer to as the big civic beats in the Bay Area. The second senior member of the team we've hired is a woman named Jean Karstensen, who had been the managing editor of Salon and had worked at SF Gate before that. And she's a very skilled journalist with a lot of diversity in her skill set, and she'll be overseeing both the online news desk, the relationship with the New York Times,